40,000.
Yeah. It's a number that just, it sits heavy in the room, doesn't it?
It really does. I was reading through the materials you sent over for today's deep dive, and I hit that number, and I just had to stop for a second. 40,000 soldiers killed. And just to be crystal clear for everyone listening, that isn't the total. That is just the attacking side.
That's the crucial distinction, right? Usually when we look back at these sorts of 19th century expansionist conflicts in the Horn of Africa, we have this very specific script in our heads.
Right.
We picture a huge modernizing army just rolling in, maybe a few shots are fired, a quick skirmish, and then the map changes color.
The inevitability narrative, like it was just a walkover, a formality.
Exactly. But then you open up this presentation by Mohammed Abubakar, which, it's all built on these really intensive findings from Professor Ahmed, and that whole narrative just completely falls apart.
Because you're going to lose 40,000 men in a walkover.
You don't lose 40,000 men in a skirmish.
No, that sounds more like a catastrophe, a meat grinder.
That is precisely what it was. And that shock you're feeling, that is the whole point. The material we're diving into today is titled The Battle of Chelenqo, Resistance and Historical Justice. And its mission is pretty bold. It's trying to take a story that's been told one way for over a century and, using hard data, just flip it on its head.
It's what the source calls a corrected and evidence-based account. I love that phrase. It's like what we think we know is a blurry photograph, and today we're finally going to focus the lens.
That's a great way to put it.
So the event is the Battle of Chelenqo, January 6, 1887. But before we get to the battlefield and before we try to make sense of those numbers, we have to set the stage, because Harar, the place being attacked, wasn't just some random town, was it?
No, not at all. Far from it. And honestly, if you don't understand what Harar was, you can't really feel the weight of its fall. You have to understand what was being lost.
Right.
The source describes Harar as a sovereign Muslim emirate.
And sovereign is a heavy word there. So we're talking about a fully independent state.
We are. It had centuries of political independence behind it. It wasn't a vassal. It wasn't a colony. Think of it as a major bustling hub of civilization in the Horn of Africa.
A center for trade, scholarship.
All of it. Trade, scholarship, religion, culture.
So if I were, walking through the gates of Harar in, say, 1885, what am I seeing?
You're seeing a really cosmopolitan city. You're seeing scholars who are connected to the wider Islamic world. You're seeing merchants trading coffee, gold, ivory. It had its own distinct government led by Emir Abdullahi ibn Muhammad.
And its own identity.
A completely distinct identity, political, cultural, religious, from, the Christian highlands of Shewa to the west.
It almost sounds like, Venice of the region. Or maybe a Singapore.
Right.
A distinct, wealthy city-state with its own center of gravity.
That's a fantastic analogy. A Venice of the Horn works really well. It was wealthy, it was proud, and it was strategic. And that last part, strategic, that's what put it in danger. Because Harar was navigating a very, very rough neighborhood in the late 19th century.
Yeah, let's unpack the geopolitics a bit. Because my understanding of that era in East Africa is that it was, let's just call it fluid.
Fluid is a very polite way of saying incredibly volatile. The source paints this picture of a region where the tectonic plates of power were all shifting at once.
Okay.
First, you had the Egyptians. They'd been a major influence, but they were in decline, pulling out. And that leaves a massive power vacuum.
And nature abhors a vacuum.
Precisely. So the Egyptians are leaving. Then you have the European powers, the British, the French, the Italians, all circling the coast like sharks, looking for a foothold.
And then, right next door.
Right next door, you have the expanding state of Shewa, led by Menelik.
Menelik, the other main character in this drama. And he obviously sets his sights on Harar. Now, the easy answer is just conquest. He wanted more land. But the source suggests it was way more calculated than that.
Much more calculated. It wasn't just about painting the map. It was about survival and modernization. Menelik wanted two things that Harar controlled. First, the trade routes. If you control Harar, you control the flow of money, coffee, all the goods from the interior to the coast.
Follow the money.
Always. But the second thing is even more critical for the 19th century: firearms.
Guns.
Guns. To build a modern empire in the 1880s, you needed rifles. Those rifles came from Europe, which meant they came via the sea. Harar was the gateway to the coast.
Right, so if Menelik wanted to secure his power against all his rivals, both internal and external,
he needed that gateway. He needed the guns that flowed through Harar.
So it's a mix of economic ambition and sheer military necessity. Harar is sitting on the gold mine, and Menelik needs the key to the mine.
And the gate key, yeah. The source notes that this wasn't a sudden surprise attack. There were escalating border tensions for a while. Diplomacy was attempted, messages were sent.
But it was kind of inevitable.
Given Menelik's strategic imperatives, he needed that coast access.
Oh.
And the vacuum left by the Egyptians, yeah, the conflict was basically on a countdown timer.
So the clock hits 0. January 6, 1887. The location is Chelenqo, just east of Harar. Let's circle back to the numbers we started with because this is where the story just gets wild.
Mm-hmm.
We talked about the casualties, but let's look at the starting lineups. This feels like David versus Goliath, but the scale is staggering.
It is. The disparity is one of the key facts you really need to grasp. On one side, you have the Ethiopian, or Shoan, army. The source cites Professor Ahmed's research putting their numbers at between 50,000 and 75,000 soldiers.
50 to 75,000? I mean, that's not an army. That's a small city on the march.
It's a massive force for that time and place, a juggernaut. Now look at the defenders, the Harari army.
Right.
They fielded somewhere between 10,000 and 15,000 soldiers.
Wow. So just doing some napkin math here.
Yeah.
Best case, they're outnumbered 3-1. Worst case, what, 7-1?
At least it was a battle fought under an extreme numerical imbalance.
Okay, so I'm going to play devil's advocate for a second.
Go for it.
If I'm a military historian looking at a 7-1 advantage for the attackers, I am predicting a rout. I'm predicting the smaller force breaks in an hour, everybody runs, and the battle is over with, minimal casualties on the attacking side.
And that is exactly the popular narrative. That is how it's often been portrayed. Menelik marched, the Harari forces were overwhelmed, Harar fell. It sounds quick, it sounds inevitable.
But the body count says something totally different, and this is where I get stuck. If the Harari army only had 15,000 men, max, and the Shuan army lost 40,000, wait, how does that math even work?
That is the question that cracks the whole myth wide open. The source is adamant this was not a minor clash. It was a full-scale, high-intensity battle. To inflict 40,000 casualties when you are that outnumbered requires a level of ferocity and discipline that is just hard to imagine.
It implies they didn't run.
They did not run. The source describes the Harari tactics as disciplined, organized, and extraordinarily courageous. They were fighting a defensive war. And the source frames it beautifully. It says they were fighting for homeland, faith, and dignity.
I guess when your back is against the wall and you're fighting for your home, you fight differently.
You fight to the absolute limit. And that is what the data suggests happened here. The Harari forces, despite the odds, they stood their ground and turned Chelenqo into a scene of absolute devastation.
They made the invading force pay for every single inch of ground.
Every inch. So let's look at that cost. We know the attacking Shoan army lost over 40,000 men. Roughly half their force. That's a Pyrrhic victory if I've ever heard one.
It is. But what about the Harari side?
This is the tragic part of this corrected account. The source describes the Harari losses as massive and devastating. It doesn't give a neat number, but it uses a phrase that really stuck with me.
What's that?
Entire generations were affected.
Entire generations. Wow, that's a chilling phrase.
It is. It implies that it wasn't just soldiers who died. It was the youth, the leadership, the scholars. The future fathers and teachers of the emirate. They were all decimated on that field. The source asserts that Chelenqo was one of the bloodiest battles in 19th century Northeast Africa.
And yet, be honest, before we started this deep dive, had you ever heard it described that way?
Yeah,
as one of the bloodiest?
Never. Yeah. It's usually a footnote, and that's why this presentation is so important. It's arguing that portraying this battle as a simple collapse due to weakness, it's just historically inaccurate. It's a lie.
It wasn't weakness.
The data suggests it was a heroic resistance against overwhelming force.
So the outcome is history. We know what happened next. The Harari forces eventually they were defeated by the sheer weight of numbers. Ethiopia achieved territorial control. Harar lost its political independence. The map changed.
The map changed, yes. But the source makes a very subtle but very important distinction here. It separates the political outcome from the moral outcome.
What do you mean by that, a moral outcome?
Well, there's a section in the source titled Harari Fighters as Heroes. And the argument is that while Harar was defeated, it was not dishonored.
That's a powerful concept. I think we live in a world that, it loves winners. We tend to think that if you lost, you must have been wrong or weak or incompetent.
Exactly. Might makes right. But this source pushes back hard against that idea. It challenges us to see that the soldiers who fought at Chelenqo were defending a sovereign state. They were fighting for their country, their rights, their dignity.
And the argument is they deserve to be remembered as heroes.
As national heroes, yeah, regardless of the final score on the scoreboard.
It's interesting because this really pivots the conversation. We started talking about military strategy guns, trade routes, troop numbers, but now we're talking about something deeper. We're talking about memory.
We are, and this brings us to the so what for the listener. Why does a battle from 1887 matter to someone driving to work today? The source addresses this directly in a section called Truth, Memory, and Historical Justice.
Truth, memory, and historical justice. Sounds a bit academic, but break it down for us.
It's really all about identity. The presentation argues that these historical narratives, they shape who we are today. If you grow up hearing that your ancestors just gave up or that they were weak and just got rolled over, that shapes how you see yourself. It shapes your community's self-worth.
Right. It's the difference between saying we collapsed and saying we stood tall against impossible odds.
Precisely. And the source uses this incredibly potent phrase, silence erases suffering.
Wow. Say that again?
Silence erases suffering. If you don't talk about the 40,000 dead, if you don't talk about the devastation of the Harari people, you are essentially telling the world that their suffering didn't happen. You're erasing it.
And the flip side of that is recognition.
Right. Recognition restores dignity. It's not about changing the past. You can't bring the fallen back. You can't restore the emirate of 1886. But you can restore dignity to their memory. The source argues that truth is necessary for genuine reconciliation. You can't have a unified history if one side's sacrifice is just invisible.
I want to be clear here, because history can get touchy. Is the source saying we should reject Ethiopian history?
Yeah.
Or that the state shouldn't exist?
No, and that's a really important nuance. It's not a call for separation or anything like that. It's a call for inclusion. It calls for a historical balance. It explicitly says we should acknowledge Ethiopian state building.
So it's not saying tear it down.
Not at all. It doesn't deny that the modern state was formed through these expansions. That's a fact. But, and this is the big but, it argues we must acknowledge that state building without erasing Harari sacrifice.
It's not an either.
It's a yes and.
Yes, the state was built and it came at a massive tragic cost that needs to be honored.
Exactly. It's about promoting scholarship over myth. Myths are simple. The strong king marched in and unified the land. That's a nice story for a kid's book. Scholarship is messy. The army advanced, met ferocious resistance, lost half its men, and destroyed a generation to achieve its goal.
And the source is pushing us to be brave enough to look at the scholarship version.
Exactly.
It's really about respecting multiple historical perspectives. You know, we always hear that phrase, history is written by the victors. This feels like an attempt to find the pages that the victors tore out of the book.
I'd say it's even more than that. It's an attempt to heal the wound that those missing pages left behind. The source concludes by emphasizing that the Battle of Chelenqo was a tragedy of immense scale. It wasn't just a strategic victory or defeat. It was a human catastrophe.
And those who fought, specifically the Harari defenders, they deserve to be seen as more than just obstacles to someone else's expansion.
They deserve to be remembered as people who defended their home. The source's closing sentiment is really quite moving. It basically says, those who fought and fell defending their homeland deserve memory, respect, and recognition.
It's a stark reminder that behind every line on a map, there's usually a very, very high price paid in human lives. And just because it happened 140 years ago doesn't mean the bill has been settled if we don't even acknowledge it.
And that price shouldn't be forgotten. That's the core message here.
So let's just recap where we've been. We've gone from the vibrant sovereign state of Harar, this Venice of the Horn, to the geopolitical pressure cooker of the 19th century.
Right.
We've looked at the massive disparity in the armies, 75,000 against maybe 15,000. We've unpacked the shocking casualty numbers that prove this was a ferocious war, not a walkover. And finally, we've touched on this crucial call for historical justice and memory.
We have, and I think if there's one thing the listener takes away from this, it should be the scale. Just remembering that number 40,000 Shuan casualties, plus the absolute devastation of the Harari forces, it completely changes how you visualize this event.
It absolutely does.
It reframes it from a conquest to a struggle.
It turns a static moment in history into something alive and painful.
And that struggle defines the identity of the people who survived it and their descendants.
You know, this whole conversation leaves me with a thought to chew on. We started by talking about how history is written by the victors. And we usually just sort of shrug and accept that.
Yeah, as a fact of life.
But this deep dive makes me wonder, What actually happens to the soul of a people when their specific sacrifices, their heroic resistance, as the source calls it, are omitted from the story everyone else tells?
That is the question, isn't it? When your heroism is painted as weakness, or your tragedy is painted as a footnote, it creates a silence.
And as we learn today, silence erases suffering.
Exactly.
Well, hopefully today we broke a little bit of that silence. A huge thank you to the work of Mohammed Obabekar and the findings of Professor Ahmed for giving us this window into the Battle of Chelenqo. It certainly changed how I look at the map.
Indeed. It's a powerful reminder to always look for the other perspective in the archives.
Thanks for listening to this deep dive. We'll catch you on the next one.